Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, Heart and Hand's own Champions League history show. We are in the second part of 1996-97, and I'm joined as always by my two colleagues, Adam Thornton. Hi, Adam.
Good morning, Martin.
And David's here as well. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to be here. Looking forward to it.
We left Old Trafford buzzing with finally seeing Manchester United step up to this particular stage, Adam. They went through convincingly against a very fancy Porto team to take the place in the semi-finals, where they would meet Borussia Dortmund, who you mentioned, Ozzy, are not quite being at the level of some of their other French counterparts. Borussia Dortmund certainly found that to be the case. They handled them quite easily over the course of two legs. I think the first leg was 3-1 at home, and that pretty much finished it there. And then these were very different games to the Porto games. Borussia Dortmund won 1-0 in Germany. A late goal, a wee bit similar to our Leipzig game, I suppose. You lose 1-0, okay, it's not the best, but it's not the end of the world. You get them back to Ibrox. There's away goals here, right enough, and there's not away goals by the time we read that semi-final. But given how Old Trafford was, given that Porto performance and result and margin, this very much felt game on, and it just didn't happen. And Dortmund showed now. I mean, I don't want to get the old cliches out the drawer here, but it kind of ticks a lot of those narrative boxes, Adam. I know you love that.
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. It's funny. I was watching something earlier on about this semi-final, and it's on the Borussia Dortmund's official YouTube channel. And the episode, it's just a little 4-minute episode, is entitled "Who the fuck is René Tretschok?" And it's like the official channel, and it's an interview with the guy himself, and that's one of the quotes he's got in the thing saying, they thought, "Who the fuck is René Tretschok?" And I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. It's not a name that I can even remember. A quick look through Wikipedia is very, very unassuming, shall we say.
You know the really interesting thing? I remember both these games, and I could tell you who scored the goal in the second leg, when he scored it, how he scored it. I remembered that they won 1-0 in the first game, but I couldn't have told you that the goal scorer was René Tretschok. So, René, we all apologise to you because you seem to be a good lad from what Adam's
it seems
saying.
It seems like he knows and expects it, so it's all good. But
I'm going to get Harrigan to track him down and do an interview with René Tretschok.
Surprised he's not
in German. Well, Harriganese is, so.
But yeah, it's actually a decent. It's one of those ones, isn't it? It's like when that first time you see Tony Vidmar's goal against Parma, and you go, "Up the keeper," and then you see the replay and you think, "No, he hasn't." But it's still a decent goal. Really interesting. I think these two games. We'll obviously come on and talk about Lars Ricken in a bit more detail in the final. I've learned a couple of things about him that I hadn't either didn't know or had forgotten. In the research for this, but yeah, I think this is for all that United were fantastic in that game against Porto. It certainly was a lot stuffier over these two legs, wasn't it?
And the other thing about it is that we spoke last week about Manchester United's evolution and their understanding. Again, they still don't understand away goals, or at least we don't play like a nation that understands away goals. United sit in the last, they lose the late goal, but then they sit in, they don't go and try and get an equaliser, which they would do now they don't have to now. But and of course, what did Dortmund do in the second leg? They flipped the script with a goal up. So in the first 10, let's go for it, which United are not expecting. Dortmund go, get their early goal, and then they go, okay, then break us down because you need 3. And it's game over, but it's textbook. I mean, it's absolutely textbook. And for United's 5 years back in the Champions League now, and that's what they have been. Okay, they missed it the Blackburn year, so take that back. But still, they have plenty of Champions League experience by this stage. To get caught with this again, I think is absolutely ridiculous. It took so long for this British mentality that a narrow defeat or a 0-0 draw away from home was a good result. It was just printed in our DNA, and Dortmund do exactly what European sides did to Rangers, did to British teams time after time that narrow win at home in the first leg, but more importantly, a clean sheet, away leg. They'll be expecting, that we'll sit in, let's just go for it in the opening 10, completely take the stadium by surprise, get the early goal because, United aren't set up for it yet. And that's it, tie over inside 10 minutes.
It kind of was. I know we've made this away goals point many times, David, but by all accounts,
but it's not sinking in, Martin. It's not sinking in 30 years ago.
The British thing, and I think we'll continue to make it, but by all accounts, Porto were looking for a draw in that first leg at Old Trafford.
And look what happened to them.
Exactly, but that doesn't really fit that kind of narrative. That it's just,
it's a generalisation. I'm not.
But I think you're right about British club.
It's a generalisation, but no, I mean, I think that I would equally balance that with the amount of teams that went to Galatasaray, for example, at Old Trafford. No, we need to score, so we're going to go and try and do so. I think that every team is different, and if you've got a fantastic defence, you can go and hold it and think over 3 hours of football you will nick a goal, and that's absolutely the case. But this tie was just, as I say, it's so. If I wanted to demonstrate the away goal rule and how British clubs didn't understand it, it's this. That said, you both nailed it. United do not play well in either of these matches, and I think it's very telling. This is the summer that Eric Cantona retires, and Ferguson has since said that it was after this match actually that Cantona came up to him and said, "I've lost a yard. I'm done, and I'm going to finish up in the summer." And Ferguson said, and at first I was like, "No, Eric, you can't." He said, but then the next couple of days he thought about it and he thought, "No, he's right." And there was a chance to go and get Teddy Sheringham in that summer, and he thought, but it was this night that Cantona went, "Nah, I'm done at this level."
I don't think I see it as I don't think I see this as a failure for them per se. I think as everything that we've spoken about up to this point, maybe because it is. Well, I was going to say maybe because it is Borussia Dortmund, but this is a good Borussia Dortmund team. They won the Bundesliga 2 years in a row. They won the UEFA Cup. Was it the year before? Or I can't remember exactly when it was, but certainly in that 3 year span. So it's Dortmund's first or United's first semi-final in not far off 40 years. Dortmund's is longer than that, probably closer to 45. So, yeah, I don't think so. In terms of it being a failure, I think if anything, both teams did very well to sort of get to this stage. Yeah,
I guess the narrative is United, especially at Old Trafford, battered them on chances. I mean, they did. They had a really good bloody goal, and Dortmund get 2 kind of deflected goals, I guess, and those are the kind of cut them open. There's maybe just that hard luck story, or it's they're looking to replicate that passion thing. This one is maybe a 50-50, and it's just someone has to lose. I think when a few weeks when we come to the next semi-final against Monaco, then it probably is fairer to ask questions about Ferguson's ability to maybe just play cautiously and slowly and just kind of try and manage that game out. But this one was just a bit of hard luck, and that someone has to lose.
One thing I would say is that the Dortmund in this season really, and it probably makes it all the more remarkable that they went on to do what they did. They had a lot of injuries, like ridiculous amounts of injuries. I think in that first leg, Sammer was suspended. Julio Cesar and Jurgen Kohler were missing as well, and Chapuisat and Karl-Heinz Riedle in attack. So it's probably why René Tretschok is scoring the goals, to be honest. So they're missing a lot. Stefan Reuter had been out most of the season, comes in and plays as the captain. Quite not an interesting, but quite I think a crucial point is for the game at Old Trafford, Kohler almost misses it, and I think it was reported at the time that he had an illness, but it was actually, I think his son or daughter died, I think, and his wife forced him basically to go and make the trip, and I think he got a man of the match performance. And
Jurgen Kohler was an absolutely super defender. He was
that mentality as well to deal with all of that, and
he's the hardest defender they've ever come across. Adam, Tell us about Dortmund then. Tell us about Borussia Dortmund. They're obviously, spoiler alert, they're going to enjoy what we talk about over the next half hour or so. How are they built? What's it felt like? Who stands out? Because this is now 2 years in a row they've been in the Champions League. This, sounds like they are kind of building towards something.
Definitely are. As you said, Otmar Hitzfeld was a manager here. He was the manager there for six years or so. I think he actually leaves at the end of this year, has a year out, and then goes to Bayern. They were dominant, I think, over this couple of years. Absolutely back-to-back Bundesliga titles that we mentioned. Lots of quality. A really, really strong side. We've mentioned captains everywhere. Matthias Sammer, Stefan Schapizat, who was ridiculously good when you're watching this back. So crucial to the way that we played. They played. Him and Karl-Heinz Riedler was a really, really good combination in there. Lars Ricken as well, who will come on to, just started coming to the fore. Michael Zorc as well, which is it's really interesting to me because I remember him more obviously as being the administrator at Dortmund, who was responsible for bringing them back from the brink, really, hiring Klopp and going on really to where they are just now, because there was that period where they weren't anything, mid-2000s sort of onwards for a bit. They weren't great at all. So I remember him from there, but he is still, he was born in Dortmund, played a crucial role for them, was there most of his career. He's a really important figure in their history, was their captain for a long time. And at one point, actually, as a central midfielder, was their second all-time top goal scorer. He played 463 times for them over 17 seasons. But in this period that we're in just now, he scored 15 goals for 3 seasons in a row. Kind of George Albert's numbers, really 94, 96 for a central midfielder. I think at this stage he's not a starter at all, but he is crucial, and he's obviously their club captain if he's not their sort of captain on the field. He only actually left 2022, so basically 40 years there as player, captain, administrator. So he is maybe someone that, I don't know, maybe for people that are a little bit older than me would remember him as a player, but one of those that you look back and you're just surprised how much he did, I guess, at the club. In terms of, I guess, how they played, or some of the other players that I think are worth chatting about. They had some good players that I think were made better by the system. They did struggle with injuries quite a bit in this year. Guys like Paulo Sousa, who I think is a fantastic player, has went on to be a very, very good manager. He sort of excelled in this system, but he struggled with injuries this year. Julio Cesar, who again I'd forgotten about, ridiculously good central defender. He misses the final and is replaced by Martin Kree. Riedler and Sammer play less than half the matches this year. Stefan Freund, I mentioned, had been out pretty much the full season with an injury. So they basically relied on, I think, Andy Moller, who was, for me, we spoke about Jari Littmanen quite a few times on this show. He's probably the closest that I can probably see to that, albeit I would maybe put Andy Moller a little bit above for what he did during this time. He was their Cantona, if you like, their number 10, always finding space, roaming about behind the strikers. He was part of that really, really strong front three, if you want to call that, with Schapizat and with Karl-Heinz Riedler. They had such a good mix about them. They had Moller there, who would this ridiculous pace, ridiculous energy and engine and getting about, always capable of scoring a goal. There you've got Schapizat, who would sort of drop off to the left. He was left-footed. He was capable of going in behind or receiving back to goal. Scored over 100 goals for Dortmund in 7 years and played a big part in this win, even if he didn't necessarily score in the final. Those two combined together, I think, were perfect foil for Karl-Heinz Riedler, who, Martin, you had a good point about maybe some of these Dortmund players didn't enjoy anywhere near the success that they did at other clubs, and I think that's fair. Riedler was a terrific header of the ball. Yeah. he was at Liverpool didn't really amount to certainly what he did at Dortmund, but such a good head of the ball. 2 goals in the final, but only finished the campaign with 4 goals, which I guess is maybe something that Liverpool fans would say wasn't exactly prolific, but he scored it when it mattered, I think, for Dortmund. So they had quite a bit of everything, with that defence being marshalled by Sammer starting as maybe a central midfielder and go back into that sort of libero role in a similar way to Koeman. There's shades of I guess a mix of some of the teams that we've seen, that we've spoken about in depth. There's a bit of Ajax, a little bit of Barcelona, and there maybe even a little bit of Juventus in terms of maybe how they set up in midfield. They had Paulo Sousa and Paul Lambert basically in there. Lambert as the legs, allowing Paulo Sousa the sort of opportunities to play and to dictate play and pick his passes, and then trying to get the ball through to Andy Moore. That was a front three, a midfield three that I think had quite a bit. And I think to David's point earlier on, this is what we're starting to see a little bit more now. If it wasn't a back three with a 3-man midfield, it was a back 4 with a 3-man midfield that were kind of all doing something similar. You were starting to see this sort of birth. Remember, it's only a couple of years since we spoke about a midfield 2 that just kicked anything that moved, but you're now starting to see a defensive midfielder and a Paul Lambert, maybe a sort of classy ball playing number 8 and a Paulo Sousa, and then a number 10 as we know it just now, that sort of number 6, number 8, number 10 combination. You're starting to see this popping up more and more now, and I think Dortmund is quite a good example of it. So it's an interesting team. There's obviously this small period that they were very good. They get picked off financially, I think, as most do, and they absolutely don't sort of recapture the style. But it's a very interesting team, and the matchup in the final, I think, is really interesting as well, because they're similar, I think, in style, but the differences, I think, are sort of nationalist differences, I would say. The German part that comes through for Dortmund and the Italian part that comes through for Juventus are slightly different in terms of how they play. Italians maybe being a little bit more methodical, a bit more concerned with structure behind the ball, whereas the German side of it is maybe just that bit more concerned with sort of getting the ball forward quickly and being as quick as they can. So it's certainly an interesting battle for the final. But yeah, this Dortmund team was very, very interesting to watch back.
Interesting you mentioned their influences, where they're born from Juventus. They've got 4 or 5 players from Juventus.
Quite a lot of that, yeah.
A few Germans.
Reuter, yeah.
Andy Moller, former Juventus. Paulo Sousa, former Juventus. Kohler, former Juventus. We'll come to that Juventus relationship later on. Davey mentioned at the start of the show, the tail end of the last show, that United maybe were slight favourites by some people getting into the semi-final. But Germany are European champions. Not the best Germany team ever to win an international tournament, but that's tough. That's the point of it all, really, just to do the biz when required. And they've got key players from that team. He wasn't actually the player of Euro 96, but he should have been Matej Sammer, and Andy Moller as well. With that, the gift of Paulo Sousa. And Adam and I speaking before we were on here, how much we love Stefan Chapuisat, who again just fitted this team kind of perfectly. They're not the big German team, but they were a very, very good one with an up-and-coming and very impressive manager.
Yeah, and Adam used a phrase earlier that I love, where he said they had players who maybe weren't great individual players, but you put them in this collective and they became more. That to me is the sign of a great manager, that you can do that you can make players better because you make their job easier and they have a clearly understood role and they're a better side because of the structure. And you still need some special players. And they have that, Paulo Sousa, Andreas Müller, incredibly talented players. Kohler, fantastic defender. You mentioned it there, Sammer, who he didn't get player of that tournament.
No, Dieter Eilts, the kind of defensive midfielder.
He was good, but come on. He was good, but come on. That's nonsense. I hope Dieter Eilts gave him that afterwards and said, look, this should be yours. But they had some really solid players in the less glamorous positions, if you like. And they had just a sprinkling of young German talent coming through. Obviously, we'll see that and again in the final. And they were so efficient. But I think in terms of what impressed me about this Dortmund side in Manchester and in the final was mentality. That they never struck me as a side who allowed noise or things in game to deflect them from what they were trying to do. And that does come from the manager, and Adam's right. This is Hitzfeld. Not quite at his peak, but not far off it. But certainly, you could just see them as I don't know. When I think of this Dortmund side, Martin, I think of a real solidity, and that can sometimes come across as a bit of a faint compliment, and it's not. I mean that they were a collective where you just felt these guys are pretty confident about handling anybody, and I think that that's a testament to a well put together side, excellently managed.
Well, yeah, interesting to talk about Otmar Hitzfeld as this series goes on, and because he's going to have more triumphs to come, and then a career that kind of disappears. But we can have a chat about that as we go. We will come back to Dortmund in the final, but look at the other side of the draw. Juventus were behind in Norway against Rosenborg. Christian Vieri equalised pretty soon after, and then put them to the sword in Turin to take their place in the semi-final, where they would meet Ajax. And yeah, the final, of course, in '96 was tight. Over these two games, it was anything but probably exaggerated. Aggregate score of 6-2, but Juventus looking utterly imperious. Ajax getting there, Adam, through a brilliant quarter-final against Atletico Madrid. Kind of mentioned it earlier or in last week's show. 1-1 draw in Amsterdam. Schneider putting Madrid ahead, Kluivert getting an equaliser. And then this topsy-turvy to and fro game in the Calderon. Again, Madrid go ahead. Kiko scoring, De Boer heads them back. Kiko misses a penalty in normal time that would have put Atletico through. It's messed things into extra time. Danny, who's the new Ajax sensation up front, asked Stuart McCall how easy it is to mark him. Scored an absolutely brilliant goal, but they get another penalty. Pantic this time scores, but Ajax still ahead in away goals. And Babangida, I think, gets the winner very late on. Testy and tempestuous, Adam. Probably in keeping with what we talked about Atletico last year. But Ajax, where are they? Still enough to get through that, but not enough to deal with Juventus.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think he's described it there, hasn't he? Yeah, perfectly.
But I think it is one of those things that can you have an aura after just a couple of years? But you know what I mean? The sort of Ajax-ness of it all. We'll get through this. We've been at the final twice. We've won it. Can take you far. I think in certain competitions and certain games, you can almost not get through on your name alone. But yeah, until you come up against a proper team, you're going to be in trouble. Where are they at this stage? Not in a great place. Is this Van Gaal's last season, or is it his second last season? They're not in a terrific place. I think you can see with some of the players that are playing. They've got Babangida, they've got Richard Vichka, Kiki Musampa, Mario Melchiot coming in this season as well. They're not quite, if we're being kind, they're not quite at the level of the players that they had a couple of years before. They do maybe similar to Milan, like we said. They do still have the sort of defensive core, if you like. Danny Blind's still there. Frank de Boer's there. Van der Sar, of course, will go to Juventus soon. But yeah, I think this is just one of these occasions that we've seen all too often, that they get picked apart with that Bosman rule, like we mentioned before. a few players stay, whether it's contractual things, whether it's lack of good offers, etc. But there's a few there that you might have expected to have left a little bit quicker, even. But the players that are coming in, I think, are not certainly not of the standard. And this Juventus team is good. For my money, I prefer some of the earlier ones. I think they are good, but I think this is just a case of Ajax coming up against a decent team, and maybe the Ajax of a couple of years ago they did give them a better game. But yeah, just one of those things. I think for Ajax, this is them tumbling down, and probably similar to Madrid. Yeah,
PSV are coming through now. I think they win the title this year. Or something the Champions League the following year.
does, yeah.
Yeah. So they're now kind of come at the fore, and it's maybe a wee while until we see Ajax. I mean, I don't want to trail something desperately horrible, but Celtic knocked them out in a qualifier not too long from here. They're not quite.
That's 40 years, to be fair.
From 97 to 2000?
2001.
Mm-hmm.
The Celtic.
But the qualifier.
Yeah, 2001. Yeah, we
don't see Ajax doing. I don't think they're involved too heavily before then. That's what I mean. It takes a while for them to get back.
Yeah, their youth system now is getting absolutely annihilated early. This was really the first sign of teams were coming in and taking Ajax youth prospects before they'd gotten into the Ajax team, which now is, as we know, is reasonably common, but back then wasn't. And they really, we talk about, Martin, about how we were a club that didn't react well to Bosman. Ajax didn't, because the famed Ajax model was built on the previous transfer system, and now it's changing, and it takes them a number of years. And if you look at that 2001 team, the reason I mention it, Shota Arveladze is a star player. It's nameless, that side. There's a lot of signings in it, and a lot of average signings. Because Ajax feel they need to move to that. They kind of stop developing young Dutch players for a few years because they thought, well, what's the point if teams are just going to come in and start taking them? But then that all gets tightened up in terms of the being able to pinch players. So no, it's a kind of wild period for Ajax, I think, and I loved Adam's point about aura, because it is still there, and even if it's fading, it still can take you quite far. We mentioned earlier when we were playing them, nobody expected us to go and beat them because of the last couple of years that they'd had, but the team wasn't the team of the previous 2 years, which was an exceptional team, right? Let's this is a good side, but that aura takes you so well, whereas the Juventus team still is that team. That's the difference. The Juventus side still is at the level that it was.
Yeah. This is Van Gaal's last season. I just checked there. It is Van Gaal's last season, but they this season, I think. Yeah, but this, I guess, sort of sums it up, because then that summer, Morten Olsen comes in. They do win the league, to be fair, but they're bringing back Michael Laudrup for a year, and that's one of those things that let's get a trick out of. I mean, let's pull something out of the hat. In absence of what we were doing so well, let's sort of double down and go and we'll bring someone in and see what happens. Yeah,
and go look at we'll come to, I suppose, the 2000, 2001, 2002 side. That Ajax side, it's full of signings. It's so un-Ajax. It's full of guys from Eastern Europe, because they're trying to repeat their trick, if you like, of instead of bringing through all these young players, we'll go and get these guys from developing markets early. And there are some good players in there, Arveladze for one, but it's there's Greeks, and it's just, they're a club who lose their identity at the turn of the century, I think.
Yeah, they had. I always remember that sort of time that you mentioned. There was Arveladze, but they had Nikos Maklas and Thomas Galasek, players that are a bit more decent, agricultural than you might think.
Yeah, and they're all right. They're good players, but they also, when you're signing 10, 11 players, clearly they don't all play the same way. In the way that the players who'd been in the great side had all come through together. And then when you're signing an experienced player to come in and play with them, or you have a Danny Blint or whatever, that's different. Whereas you're right, with Michael Laudrup, it's now And then Brian Laudrup, of course, it's will you go and win us some? We know it's only going to be a year or two because of your age. That's not who Ajax were. But I think that, they just didn't. They weren't themselves. Was probably the best way to describe it.
I find this quite funny, Martin. I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because as we obviously dig into this, Barcelona are going to come back into it with a vengeance. But the whole ideology thing, it's funny because they do it for a bit and they get success with it. Ajax did it then. They did it 2019ish when they got as far as they did, and they bring this next batch through. Barcelona obviously did it with the Dream Team and the Guardiola team, and then it felt like there was going to be a little bit of it there with Xavi bringing in guys like Gavi and Pedri and Lamau and Kubarsi coming through, and they might still do. But see those off years, or those off 4 or 5 years, it's funny how just the other way they go. They bring in it's one of those things, let's try something different, and the something different is just the opposite of what we've done before. Let's bring in these big physical players and play in a way that's just completely against our ethos. It's like, it's just like an all or nothing vicious circle that both of them seem to go through.
I think you're right. I think it really is interesting, and it must be. These auras and these philosophies only come from success. You wouldn't keep a philosophy if you kept getting pumped, but you had a team, and in Ajax's case, a player who led a team that was very successful, incredibly successful, wildly successful given their size and whatever else, size of the Netherlands. And therefore, this is how we do it. And Barcelona, kind of similar, I suppose. And when you're not producing the players in order for you to do that, I imagine there's a lot of panic, because they're big clubs and big clubs need to win things. And it's juggling the need for success with these principles. In fact, they do. They lead to these kind of wild. Zlatan, for example, even your man was guilty of looking for the pragmatic and the functional, because it's always good to have that. And I guess it's where some of those other clubs who are a wee bit more prosaic are okay with that, and they'll just keep tinkering around with signings and managers until something kind of works without that pressure. But I think that maybe the extremes aren't there; they just feel more extreme because you have that context in the background. But no, it is an interesting one, and it probably is, David, you're right, the end of that identity for a while. Again, speaking to Rob about his experience as a United fan here, I said, did you, after the Porto thing, did you get on that hype train? Did you think you were going to win it? He said, well, I thought we had a good chance of getting through Dortmund, but I knew it didn't matter because Juventus were going to win. That was the feeling. It's hard to really say how huge favourites they were going into this final.
Manchester City, Inter. There's a comparison.
Yeah,
Manchester City, Inter.
Possibly. But they had made changes, Adam. Ravanelli and Vialli and Paulo Sousa from that team that won the Champions of Europe are gone. You love Mark Iliano. He comes in that summer. Christian Vieri comes in from Atalanta. The experience of Alan Botsic as well as I guess their big signing that summer. You're a man very close to your heart, Adam. I know Zinedine Zidane. Who I must say, it should be noted in the words of Tony Gubba during the France-Spain Euro 96 game, it's interesting that Zidane was not the household name he would become, because he called him Zinedine Zidane. Obviously hadn't been up to speed with his PR at that particular time. So there are changes, right? There are changes in this Juve team. Del Piero's still there, of course. A lot of their defensive structure still the same. The keeper's still the same. How does it work then, especially with Zidane and Del Piero? Is Del Piero just playing off of Vieri then, and Zidane at the top of that diamond, Deschamps at the bottom of it? Is Zidane then just basically replacing Sosa?
Yeah, I think it does work. Your point about the defence, I think, is possibly, it's been a while since we did it, but it's possibly something we mentioned at the tail end of the last show. Ciro Ferrara Mark Iuliano, Sergio Perini, they sort of swapped them about. Sometimes they were centre half, sometimes they were fullbacks. It's a different type of flexibility to what we spoke about before with Berendelli and Pisotto. That was playing on either side. This is centre halves playing at right back and vice versa. I think Ferrara the year before was right back. He's now centre half in the final. But yeah, the midfield again, it's an interesting balance. Like we said with Dortmund, it's similar. Slightly. You've got Jugovic as a sort of left-sided player, not huge amounts of pace, but obviously left-footed, left quality on the ball, as you can imagine. Delivio turning up on right side of a midfield diamond here, just lots of energy, pace, and everything you would expect from that, just constantly. Zidane, not a household name, fair enough. This period, these 3-4 years for me is the best Zinedine Zidane. I think he probably gets more plaudits later in his career. I thought he was fine at Real Madrid. I didn't get the hype. If I'm being honest, I thought he was fine to good, but I don't think he was particularly great there. It was a whole Galactico. Zinedine Zidane is here. For me, he was far better at Juventus and in the late 90s than he was at Madrid and in later areas. And maybe that is because he was a little bit further forward. You're right. He was a number 10. If we talk exclusively about the final, number 10 behind Vieri and Boksic. And it was clear in the final watching it, and I found some interesting quotes from Paulo Sousa and Paul Lambert, of all people, about the impact that Zidane was having in that final. And Sousa said that they found the first 20 minutes or so really, really tough. Juve were all over them, and they decided actually on the pitch, which is really interesting, that somebody basically had to deal with Zidane, and somebody could just deal with the rest of the midfield. So Lambert said, we spoke during the game to change it. The two of us looked at it. Zidane was playing on the other side to where I was, but Paulo and I switched because that allowed Paulo the freedom to do what he wanted to do. It gave me the role that I was used to doing, and Lambert nullified Zidane basically for the last hour of that game, just restricted him totally, just a man marking thing that allowed Dortmund to then impose themselves on the game. So that was, I guess, quite interesting in that side. But yeah, for me, Zidane playing as that number 10, I thought he was fantastic in this 4 year period, and he was a welcome addition to that Juventus team. I think that probably needed a little bit. It was in danger of being maybe a little bit too functional the years before. And when, like you said, I think that quote that we had last time around, they replaced their striker every year and still managed to get where they needed to get to. I think that was the same this year with Vieri and Boksic. Obviously, you've got Del Piero, and I know you've got some opinions on the choice in the final. I have got some opinions after watching it back as well, which might explain a little bit about why Del Piero didn't play in that final. But yeah, certainly I think those three, Vieri, Del Piero and Zidane, probably came along at the right time, I think, to take them on a little bit. Yeah,
and clearly the Champions League the year before was their big thing. They win it. They didn't win the title. They win the title this year. They're absolutely spinning as a team. The final then is in Munich. We bit like Rangers turn up to Champions League final at Parkhead, I guess. Huge crowd, huge German crowd, as you would imagine. Very, very loud when Dortmund are threatening. Davey, the only 20 minutes that Adam mentioned, on another night, Juventus are out of sight, probably should have the penalty. I think there's a push on Jugovic, I think it is. Yeah, he's a wee bit unlucky, hit the side netting. And either side of the goals that we was kind of talking about, Zidane hits the post. They have a goal. Vieri gets a goal. I think Jugovic actually scores. Vieri's maybe judged to have handled the ball. I think at the time, because the hand is so close to the body, I'm not entirely sure if there was VAR in 1997 that might not have been chopped off. Juventus are all over them. It's just not going to happen. And then Dortmund scored 2 goals in 5 minutes. It's, Adam mentioned, Carl Sainz, really not a scorer of a lot of goals, but hugely important ones. Set piece-ish. I suppose that the first corner doesn't really work. It comes out to Paul Lambert, who just spins and puts a lovely ball into the back. He loses Perini, Davy, bless him. His chest control's brilliant, and he just has enough to stab at home. And then 5 minutes later, he gets ahead, and ironically, the second goal reminds me a wee bit of Zidane's second in the World Cup final a year later. Not just because it's ahead on the box, but it's like, shit, 2 goals in the space of no time. This final appears to be kind of done, and it's not the team that maybe we expected to have been ahead. This is a kind of weird kind of situation. It's one of those beautiful moments in football where all your possession, all your good play, 2 things very quickly, and the whole thing's kind of turned on its head, Davey.
Just seismic. It really was, and it felt that way. I remember almost a sort of palpable sense of shock sitting watching this, because as we mentioned, Juventus were the big favourite. We knew Dortmund were a good side. We'd seen them in those 2 games against Manchester United, but obviously in Scotland, the Lambert thing had drawn a fair bit of attention as well. And it is quite a wild story when you think about it. Paul Lambert, who was a bit of a Scottish football, he'd been at St Mirren, then he went to Motherwell. Journeyman, St Mirren to Motherwell, and it's the equivalent, I think, now of maybe like Keith Lasley getting just plucked out of it. Is just a guy that you thought was an all right player at that level, but Motherwell had got into the UEFA Cup and they'd played Dortmund, and Dortmund had seen him and went, oh right, okay, we'll take him on this newfangled Bosman thing, because clubs were were more open to, because it was cheap basically, to giving players a try, if you like, and obviously his wages were nothing. And he has a spectacular season for them. He really does. So we'd had a bit of a follow-up, but back to the match, the early stages of this match are going exactly as I think we all anticipated that they would. And it did seem a bit of a matter of time till the opening goal came, but it comes at the wrong end that you're expecting. And then while Juventus are, I wouldn't say reeling from it, but adjusting to it, set piece, and then you're right, Martin, it is that sense of, wow, this is a long way back now. And this is a side that has a very good defence. That's one thing that everyone was in agreement about. This is a side that has an absolutely terrific defence. And there's just, this, as you can see, this increasing sense. And I think up to half time, there's just a weird sort of atmosphere around it. Like the whole stadium's in shock. The Dortmund fans obviously are in dreamland. Kind of like the nearest actually I could describe it is, and thankfully we were all there. You and I were impressed, Martin, Adam, you were in the away end. It's Dortmund again. It's us. It's when that third went in against Dortmund, even more so than the fourth, when Lundstrom's goal went in. It's that sense of, what the hell is happening here? And it really was that. And I do go back to that Man City. Imagine if in that Man City Inter game, Inter had scored 2 quick goals after City had dominated them. That it was that type of feeling. It was like, wow, where has this come from? Because when they get the opener, of course, that can happen. Juventus will roar back at them. Not only do Juventus not roar back at them, they go and add it. Riedler was, he was almost a British type player, wasn't he? He was a proper old-fashioned target man, the type that the phrase "good feet for a big man" was invented for. But he was deadly in the air. I mean, he really was. If you put in decent deliveries, and they do, it's a terrific header, by the way. No chance for the goalkeeper.
It is a good header. The only thing I would say is Delivio's on the post, and I know he's not the tallest at all, but it feels like it just goes right above him. He must be, I don't know, 5'6" or 5'7", but it goes right above him. You think you're on the post, like one job here is just to jump.
Yeah, you
really.
Head the ball. I think you've in a wee bit of shock, Adam.
Yeah,
I think
the one thing I was going to say about
not going the way it was supposed to go.
And I think you're right. It's just that shock factor. Everybody was thinking, oh, I expected this to be maybe even a little bit tighter, or Juventus to be ahead, but the fact that it was Dortmund racing into the 2-goal lead, everybody's pulling a bit of shock. The one thing I would say, Perini does miss the header in the first goal, but Montero takes ages to come back out when the ball is there. So again,
I was never a fan of his. And
too rash.
he must have been good to play at the level that he played at, and he played for some huge clubs, and there he is in the Champions League final, so he can't be bad, right? But I was never his greatest fan. I thought his decision making was really poor, and in that league at the as you say, Adam, he would charge off on these wild, and he picked up a lot of booking. I think there was one year in Serie A he got 17 bookings, which is quite remarkable in a 34-game season. But yeah, I was never a big fan of his.
Just one of those players that it's like, oh, he's isn't he hard? Like, those type of players, and you're like, yeah, and he's just very, very rash. Not one for me, Too much passion.
Too much passion, too little technical ability, and yeah, I just there are certain guys who super clubs seem to need to own. So there was him, and do you remember Santiago Solari, who only ever played for Inter or Real Madrid and seemed to shuttle? But Morata's probably a modern equivalent of these guys. You think, how have you managed this? You're not that good, but but Dortmund by half time, and I mentioned earlier about mentality and solidity. At the 2-0, you think they're not giving this up. They're not going to be pegged back.
I'm very conscious about the shock and the surprise. We don't make Dortmund out to be, Dukla Pumfleston ended up in the Champions League final. As we said, they are a fantastic team. It's more a measure of their opponents who just looked imperious, 6-2 aggregate winners against Ajax of Amsterdam, etc., etc. Lippi makes a big call, Adam. Del Piero is carrying something, and he decides not to start him. I know James Richardson, for one, has always felt that was a huge mistake. That Del Piero should have started. He comes on for Perini in the at half time. From what I've seen of the game back, the impact in terms of movement and incision seems to be a lot more like it. Of course, they are flooding. I mean, Juve are playing with Boksic and Vieri and Zidane and Del Piero. I mean, this is very. It has to be very attacking. He scores a beautiful goal. One of the most underrated Champions League goals of all time, because Juventus don't win, maybe. But yeah, your thoughts on that call by Lippi?
Yeah, so there's two sides to it, I guess. For me, there's the should he have started the game side, and I think probably would agree with that. However, I think Juventus's strategy in this game was maybe not one of containment, but they were pretty concerned, I guess, with Dortmund. They thought Chapuisat was a danger man. Clearly, you can see in some of the early exchanges they wanted to get the ball to him in a way that he couldn't do anything with it. So, trying to get him receiving the ball in the half turn so that he couldn't turn. He didn't have enough time or back to goal, so that they could get on him with Perini. And I don't think Dortmund did a well enough job of putting him into the right positions to allow him to get past that. But Juventus's midfield done an excellent job up on him as soon as he got the ball. Delivio, Deschamps, even Perini pressing up, just closed in on all angles with him, and they just swamped him, for want of a better word. So whether or not they would have been able to, Juventus would have been able to sort of do that, because you're then changing things a little bit. They wanted to play forward quite a bit as well, because obviously we mentioned how strong Dortmund were defensively. Juventus played forward quite a lot in this game. There's lots of longish balls, not like punts, but like a lot. Again, you can't really do that with Del Piero, because you've got Vieri and Boksic who'll bring it in any way possible. They're up against Collar and Sammer and Cree, doing a really good job there. So I can sort of understand it. However, it's Alex Del Piero, and you play him as far as I'm concerned from the start, regardless of that. You tailor your approach to get the best out of Del Piero and Zidane. So I think I can understand the logic of more physicality. They want to bypass midfield, and then when Dortmund then have to go long, Juventus have the players behind the ball to get the ball back and go again. So I can understand it from that point of view. Bringing him on, I think, really, it's difficult. It's so difficult to say when they're 2-0 down. But as you mentioned, Juventus have been playing very well for that sort of first half an hour ago. When they brought him on, felt they lost their shape a little bit, as I guess you would do when you're 2 goals down and you're wanting to batter through. But they brought one for Perini, like you said.
To force it. They start to force it.
They have to.
Well, yeah, but by that what I mean is that there was a crispness in the first half hour that goes out the window and a sort of raggedness appears.
Yeah, and I think you can see that by how they reshuffled the team. He come on for Perini, like you said. Ferrara, let me try and get this right. Ferrara goes from from centre half to right back. Giuliano goes from left back to centre half. Delivio goes from right-sided centre midfield to left back. So all of those changes to get Del Piero on the pitch disrupts things a little bit. You've then got Jugovic and Deschamps sitting as maybe more of a 2 when before it had been kind of a 3 with Delivio. You've got Zidane still playing up there, and then you've got the 3 forwards. So it turns into a bit of a 4-2-4, 4-2-1-3. Maybe just loses its shape a little bit. What they then did as well is they then conceded the centre of the park. Delivio had moved. Dortmund had one more player in there, and it just left a lot for Jugovic and Deschamps to do. And then I think
which is where the third goal comes from, right?
It's where the third goal comes from. They're not really sure. I'm not sure who it is, but the player isn't really sure whether to go and press Andy Muller or stay with Ricken, and he does neither in the end. And obviously it's a great goal. I hadn't actually realised, but there's a quote that Ricken had been watching from the bench, and he said he saw Peruzzi standing outside his goal all the time, and it's one of these things you're like, did you really think this, or have you just said this as a nice story? But he says, I've noticed him out his goal. If I come on, if I get the ball, I'm going to get a chance to shoot a goal straight away. And then lo and behold, he comes on, but he does take it very early. To be fair, I'm not sure Peruzzi is that far out the goal by the time Ricken looks up to hit that shot. It's a really, really incredible finish.
Immediately though, doesn't he, Peruzzi?
Yeah,
I mean, we've got professors of hindsight here. And I know what you're saying, Adam, right? But they had to do something. And what they did worked, because I think Juventus looked dangerous in the first half. Juventus were the better team.
Definitely.
It's such a weird final. And that's how football goes, and that's the beauty of it. And Dortmund deserved to win because it was. This will shock you. They scored more goals than Juventus, and therefore that's how we've this is how we measure who deserves to win things. But Juventus were superb overall. I know what you mean about disrupting the shape, but it does work.
But you have to,
second half. They get the goal back. Professors of hindsight then, 65 minutes, you're back in the game. Do you then take Boksic off, maybe put Takenardi, I think, maybe, to give yourself that wee bit more stability? You've still got 25 minutes left to force extra time or whatever, because Lippi must know we've taken this gamble. We have got one back, but we are quite open here. It's very easy for us to say, Adam, of course.
Yeah.
20 odd years after the event.
But is there some context there as well? I'm trying to think of a realistic example that involves Rangers. That Man City Inter one, I guess, was a good one. But if Rangers are playing the Scottish Cup final against Hearts and we pull a goal back, is our thought? Yeah. Is our thought, let's bring on a defensive midfielder here and
well, do you remember that game against Hibs when we went 3-0 down and we got a goal back through Arfield? And he put Ryan Jack on, whoever the manager was that day, because I think that nobody takes responsibility for it. But he stuck Ryan Jack on, and we were all going, "What the fuck are you doing?"
Yep.
So Martin's right. With hindsight, it's absolutely the correct thing to do. But if Ricken going through there panics and fluffs it, then who knows? But it's such a composed early finish from a boy that really did appear to have the world at his feet at this point. I go back to my mentality thing that I certainly thought when Juve got the goal back, 25 minutes to go, right, be interested to see if Dortmund, because nerves will surely no, they don't. They just go and get the third. And there was like that Germany side that you talked about, Martin, the 96 side, they might not be the best team in the world, but they had a focus and a determination and a way of
tournament team.
Yeah, and this Dortmund side show that they're they're confident in their own abilities. They certainly don't panic, and if you like, they almost assess, okay, Juve have got to go back, but there's a lot of space here that wouldn't normally be here, and they take advantage. But it is still a sublime goal.
And that was Ricken's fourth goal in the tournament as well. So he then was levelled up with Riedler. Just on Ricken, then, like you mentioned, he did seem to have the world at his feet. I hadn't realised. I knew about the motorbike story. I'm not sure if that's widely known about. He suffered a motorbike crash 2 weeks before the final. I knew about that, but I didn't know that he was in. Is it the Federal Defence or the German Army? And he was time serving, and he had to do 2 nights a week in the German Army barracks, still while playing. And he needed special dispensation for the quarters and the semis to leave. They weren't impressed, and his sergeant major was a Schalke fan, I think, which made him even more. But yeah, but he needed 4 days off to play the final. And the weekend before, he says, the weekend before, I forgot to lock my locker, and my firearms card was in there. They wanted to put me in a military prison for 3 days for that, and I had to tell them I can't. We're playing Juve in the Champions League. He said, so I had to do some night shifts after it to make up for it, which just seems
it keeps the feet in the ground, I suppose. But I
so
can't be the
far
only one
removed from now.
Can't be the only one who thought that we maybe had learned after previous lessons that we shouldn't allow the Germans to train all their guys militarily. But okay, live and let live. But he you thought, because semi-final goal, here's another huge goal. You thought, right, this is Germany's next star. I actually remember thinking at the time that he was Möller's, successor.
Yeah.
Because Möller was getting on at this stage. He wasn't finished, but he was older. And I thought, right, the founder, because Germany had always been good at that, hadn't they? Almost the production line of players. And I thought that Ricken was the next one. But it just a wee bit, the modern comparison for young listeners are Mario Götze after the World Cup, where you thought, right, well, woof, this boy is absolutely. And then that turns out to be the highlight.
It should be noted. I mean, Juventus are peppering that Dortmund goal pretty much all night. Stefan Klos is a brilliant game. Certainly the second half, loads of good saves just to keep the drama away and keep any kind of nerves in that final kind of 20 minutes. Couple of former or a couple of future Rangers players obviously on the field, Klos and Perini, and a Rangers mad player winning the Champions League with Dortmund, Adam. We also mentioned about it a while ago, about Lambert not really being respected, recognised, or what he could do being fully kind of recognised in Scotland, or the way we play football in Scotland. Was this just another example of what we just were not understanding about metronome and about tempo that's required and about control that's required, and just because it's not a kind of Brian Robson-esque midfielder, then he's St Mirren and Motherwell's kind of the level. We were missing all the tricks.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just changed really quickly. Like we said, I mean, you guys mentioned there that going from summer of 93 to summer of 96, where we were really unlucky there, to absolutely no chance this is happening within 3 years. I think that change is signified for me. I think with the central midfield area, guys like Paulo Sousa, guys like Paul Lambert. I was going to say we weren't seeing them in Scotland. We've seen Lambert in Scotland, but we didn't see the type of role that he was playing in that team. We hadn't really thought about number 10s in that way. I don't think so. Yeah, I think it is that midfield that we mentioned even a few years before. You mentioned, we were speaking about Marcel Desailly coming in, and we're thinking, wow, like that's a really interesting evolution for it to be so quickly, 2 or 3 years, moving from that to a defensive midfielder like Paul Lambert, who can do that disciplined marking job. Someone like Paulo Sousa, even on the other side, Didier Deschamps, one of the best in the world at that sort of number 6 role. For it to move so quickly to proper central midfielders in that way that can both attack and can both defend, and in Sosa's case, I think really sums up how that position had evolved in just a few years. And I guess we can extrapolate that further into how European football was evolving in those 3 years, and certainly Rangers were not, I guess, because we were dealing with we had other things in our mind, I guess, it's fair to say in this point, and evolution wasn't exactly high on the agenda there. So I think the central midfield position, like I said, just a few years before, we were looking at it and thinking, that's Marcel Desailly is reinventing that role, and we're now at this stage very, very quickly where it's just turned into the key part of the team. It's not just about legs and kicking people anymore. You've got players in there that can pick a pass and can dominate.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, as it always is, revisiting 90s European football. Thank you, David.
Thank you. And yet more proof that football was just better back then.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, guys. It was an absolute pleasure. There is, if anybody is interested, there's a really good Lars Ricken article in These Football Times around about this time that sort of showcases that Dortmund team and his sort of, I guess, his appearance, but also like we said, he never really went on and did what people would think. So it sort of captures that quite well if anybody is interested in it. But yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed this one.
97-98 is where we're going next week, of course, and the Champions League is getting bigger from 4 groups to 6. And hold the phone, they're allowing second place teams to join in the European Cup. Phone the Advertising and Standards Agency about that. We'll be back next week. Until then, bye for now.